Yeah, we're looking forward to hosting everybody from the group in August.
I have never been in Urbana-Champaign, so I'm really excited about the meeting. And I kind of owe you an email also, Praveen, like a response to your last email. Yeah, this is exciting to getting everybody together.
Hi, Julia. Good to see you with us.
Hey, Marianne.
Okay, I think we can get started. So, Antoine, if you want to introduce the speaker. I think you're muted.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't have any sound before. Are we waiting for more people or we're ready to go?
Yeah, we're ready to go. So you could go ahead. Yeah.
Sure. So hello everyone. Thanks for joining us today. And today we're welcoming Professor Julia Perdrial, who is the Director of Geoscience and Associate Professor of Geochemistry in the University of Vermont. She graduated from a PhD at University Louis Pasteur in Strasbourg, France, and she was a postdoc at the Arizona Critical Zone Observatory in Tucson. She's the lead PI of the C Critical Zone Collaborative Network Big Data Cluster, which is using big data to assess eco-hydrological resilience across scales. And her research interests include carbon dynamics, dissolved organic matter chemistry, catchment hydrology, and biochemistry, biotic and abiotic primary and secondary mineral, and so on. And today, she's going to talk to us about transdisciplinary critical zone science, which she's involved in a lot, and tools and attitudes for water research and education. So thank you, Professor Julia Perdrial, for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And right, so I hope you can see my screen. And I wanted to start with this question, what is water? I'm going to talk about water research, water education, but what is water? And there are a lot of different answers to that question. Water has physical components. Times in water research, I'm thinking about what is in the water and how much water is there. There's technological components a lot that keep us busy. There's also social components in the sense of, in hydrology, we're thinking about water just flowing downhill. There's additional components of this that water also flows to money, right? Water flows to power. There's additional aspects of this. But that's not even what I am going for with that question, what is water? Because this here is coming from a story that was part of a speech by David Foster Wallace that he gave about 20 years ago. And I think this gets really nicely at a couple of things that I mean by attitudes and what sort of we need to get transdisciplinary approaches really well. So here it goes. So there are these two young fish swimming along, and they happen to meet an older fish swimming in the other way, who nods at them and says, "Morning, y'all. how's the water? And the two young fish swim for a bit, and then eventually one of them looks over at the other and says, what the heck is water? And I really like this as sort of a way of clarifying that sometimes we are so much in a certain water that we don't even know we're in the water. And I'm going to use this here also for sort of clarifying what I mean by this. This is called the Johari window, which I find really funny that they just thought we have no idea how to call this, so let's just take the first few letters of our names and like let it be that. It is essentially a matrix of what's known to the self and not known to the self, and what's known to others and not known to the others. I think like the upper part is really interesting in that concept of working in a space with lots of different people and different disciplines and approaches, because there are things that you know about me and that I know about me, but there are things that you know about me that I don't actually. And those are my blind spots. So I have to kind of own up to this. I'm a white woman, middle class, socialized in Central Europe, Germany of all places. My blind spots are likely much bigger than anybody else's, which is bad news. But there is one way of how even I can recover from my blind spots, because it's really inherent that that means that somebody else knows about this. So by listening and learning, I can actually decrease my blind spots. And one thing that I just want to put up front that is important to know, I like this graphic a lot. This is coming from sort of the intercultural competency kind of idea that in the sense of generating awareness and blind spots, at the beginning, we are unconsciously incompetent, which feels pretty good. We don't know that we don't know. The next stage is a bit of the bummer, like the own experience when we're realizing, oh, we're wrong, or we did not know this, we had no clue. That's the part that is a really negative experience for most people. And I think this is part of the attitudes that we have to overcome. So as we are all fish that are not yet the old crusty fish swimming towards a greater awareness, I think it is really important to just normalize that part. So all that said, as sort of like a framing where I'm going to bring us, this is sort of the flow of the presentation. So I want to talk a bit about the group and the project where we work on all of these things. I want to give a couple of thoughts around this idea of disciplinary, interdisciplinary, and some of the misconceptions that we might have. I want to present on a combination of inductive and deductive approaches that really comes from working in an interdisciplinary setting in water research. Learning, transdisciplinary. I'm going to define at least how we use the term, and put this in a context for water education. And just going with the attitudes, with the example of the learning of our own sort of misconceptions, I would say the first required attitude is ego strength, which is not a big ego. It's essentially a secure ego that can handle being wrong. So I'm going to add to that list of attitudes that I think are important. Not that I have them, but that I know that I should have them. All right. So the first part, just the project and a bit of sort of the definitions of that. These here are the people that I get to work with. That's the big data cluster. And I love updating the slide. We're growing, right? It's the nature of these types of projects. And it's a beautiful group of people that span a lot of disciplines, that span a lot of approaches, a lot of experiences. And Antoine just read the title of our full project, right? We'll typically call ourselves just big data because it's simple. But yeah, a lot of projects kind of feed into what I'm presenting. So for the definitions, I kind of use this a lot in teaching when I talk about interdisciplinarity. For example, if we're thinking of an apple as being one discipline, sometimes we hear the terminology around multidisciplinarity, right? There's also cross-disciplinarity. Multidisciplinarity is sort of akin to a fruit basket. Like you have a lot of disciplines in there, but there's no true integration attempted. And the interdisciplinarity or cross-disciplinarity is a sort of synonymous. That would be a fruit smoothie, okay? That's like really blended together. And sometimes it's helpful to see what's the real power of this interdisciplinarity to go back and what even is a discipline. So this is a couple of quotes from folks that thought about this much longer and much more deeply than I ever have. One is that a discipline really are tools, methods, procedures, exemplar, concepts, theories that account coherently for a set of objects and subjects. So that's a bit sort of abstract, but we intuitively kind of know what it means. But if that happens over and over again in one discipline, it also makes the next quote more true than not, is that disciplines become the ways in which experts, so us, construe the phenomena of our world, right? So it comes with a worldview, which means we're back at the blind spots. We can have individually blind spots in a lot of different ways. I think actually disciplines also have blind spots because of this. And I would say there are disciplines that have more blind spots than others. For example, a lot of disciplines in the humanities, it's their main job to know about how knowledge is produced. How do we know what we know? And how do we know what is true, right? I would say that the nature of many STEM disciplines is actually quite, focused. And often we're unaware that there is maybe multiple ways of knowing. And again, another plug for interdisciplinarity is that the same way how other people can tell us, oh, you might be unaware of something, other disciplines can tell us, hey, there's more to this. You have more tools available that you can use, which I think is really powerful. So here is a worry that I actually encounter a lot of times when I talk about interdisciplinary work, and that is that interdisciplinary work, interdisciplinary science, dilute sciences, that we might all become masters of none, that there will only be breadth without depth. And I think it's actually a misunderstanding of who the fruit smoothie is, right? So if we thinking about this as one single scientist or educator with a broad knowledge, one single person being the fruit smoothie, so to say, that we would all have to know a little bit of everything, like a little bit of all these different disciplines, as opposed to somebody with very deep expertise knowing a lot about one or two things. In reality, I think in interdisciplinary projects, to kind of milk that analogy one more time, the fruit smoothie is the team. It's not the individual scientist. So this figure here, I really like this. We didn't come up with it, but we're put it in the context of critical zone sciences. But a lot of people have thought about this for a long time, that essentially to bring the depth and the breadth together in really meaningful ways, we just have to put teams together really intentionally. We have to be able to have some folks that know a little bit about everything, and we need people that know a lot about one thing to integrate that together. I also find this terminology really helpful for clarifying this. So this is spoke to me as a geochemist, the simplified periodic table of expertise, periodic table, I'm there for it. And I just want to focus on sort of the specialist tacit knowledge, where we can separate it into interactional knowledge. That means that you can understand the knowledge of the language of a domain, but you might not have the practical competence, as opposed to the contributory knowledge. That is actually the competence of contributing something, doing something. In the way how I often think about it is that I can plan a trip and I can drive a car without being able to build the motor, right? So that's kind of the combination. So I want to give an example. Speaking about the water research, many years ago, this group of people here set out to build a relational database because we really wanted to have data on the critical zone from head to toe. So building on the catchment attributes, which is really a lot of critical zone attributes across the continental US, from Nance Ador, adding stream water composition, adding atmospheric deposition data, in a way that all of this can be combined. That was sort of the goal. And not only building a relational database, but also putting a bit of an pre-analysis in there that helps the science community understand what you can do with this. So in this example, we're putting the catchment attributes of bedrock with base flow index as bubble size on the matrix of the ratios of typical geogenic solutes to learn something about weathering, or to look at this atmospheric deposition and a trend analysis of where atmospheric deposition goes over time. These are all sorts of things that require a lot of different types of expertises. So I'm going to put this in that context. So for the data sciences, I might have some interactional knowledge. I'm not going to be able to build the database, but there is a lot of people that can build the database. When it comes to the geochemistry and to these examples, this looks a bit different. When it comes to hydrology, this looks a bit different. What typically works really well is when people that have a lot of this contributory expertise are willing to teach a bit of it. And especially the folks that start having this interactional expertise, that they're really willing to learn the language to understand what people are talking about. I think this is the most important thing. So we can plan the trip, we can drive the car, we can build the motor. Not everybody has to be able to do everything if your team is put together well. So in terms of attitudes, I would say this entire piece comes with a lot of humility and generosity, actually. Being willing to teach somebody from a very different discipline the language of your discipline and the meanings of this, and the humility of being able to, okay, I don't know anything about it, but I'm going to learn it. I'm going to be out of my comfort zone most of the time and be fine with it. All right, I want to talk about this inductive and deductive piece in some of the water research that we're doing, because this is really something that I find very exciting. And from my sort of science path, I started out as a geologist. My original training is in geology and mineralogy. And then I started geochemistry. And then later on, microbiology. And then I got really into biogeochemistry and catchment science and critical zone science. So sort of like my scientific upbringing was very much rooted in a traditional discipline that uses the scientific method in the sense of we're generating a hypothesis and then we're testing it. So this is a classical deductive approach, and many natural sciences actually use this. Hypothesis, maybe we're finding a pattern, we're testing the hypothesis. From data sciences and also many subfields of social sciences, a very different approach is used typically. That is more inductive, where you look first at the data. You don't even come with a preconceived notion of what question you want to answer. You look at the data first and look for patterns. And maybe that gives you an idea on a hypothesis. What I find really, really amazing is when we can combine these approaches. And there's more approaches, but these are right now something that in the big data cluster, we're really kind of looking at, because in the iteration, we kind of get the best of both worlds. So I want to give an example because we have the data from head to toe. So we have climate, we have vegetation metrics, bedrock characteristics, we have the water quality, and so much more. There's over 50 catchment attributes in there. Li wrote a beautiful paper on this and using these water quality data and putting it on the Bodico plot that essentially collapses a lot of data on the axis of climate, right? So this is potential evapotranspiration over precipitation and evaporation, ET over precip. And in that span is the further you go up or to the right in these axes, the drier it is. So we're having the water limited systems and then the systems that are not limited by water, but by energy here. The bubble size is just the concentration. So we're seeing that as it gets drier, the bubbles are bigger. That means in that case, the concentration of that solute, we're showing sodium here, is higher. So we can use this in an inductive way of just looking at the data and coming up with a couple of hypotheses, right? And this is what a master's student working with me right now, Niara Hicks, is doing. She was like, what is actually hidden within these bubbles? And she looked at a number of catchment attributes from a hypothesis standpoint and saying, well, you know, the concentration of something in a river and in a stream, in this case, expressed as ionic strength as a more sort of like global measure, could be impacted by the plants, could be impacted by rooting depths. That's one of the catchment attributes. It could have something to do with the subsurface permeability, how easy it is for the water to percolate, dilute the streams. And so in that case, the bubble size, there's still the concentration, but the bubble color now are these variations in the different catchment attributes. The fact that here we have different color codings across different water and energy limits and different bubble sizes means that it's a bit more complicated than just that. So one thing that we looked at was, let's just see this separate for bedrock lithology. And bedrock lithology, you don't just get to adjust based on the experiment that you want to do, right? We're constrained off what bedrock we have in the US. But these four bedrock classes, carbonate sedimentary rocks, metamorphic rocks, siliciclastic sedimentary rocks, and unconsolidated sediments span a gradient across climates, right? We have carbonates in wet and in dry, in warm and in cold places. So we can use this and see what does the climate impact have. So to go with an inductive approach, then Niara separated by these main bedrock classes and first checked with a random forest analysis, which is a machine learning tool that is really good for these sort of like, let's look for patterns first and see what actually drives the composition of these streams and rivers. In that case, she's looking at ionic strength as sort of an integrated measure of how concentrated stuff is. And there's a couple of things that show up that are quite different for these different subsurface materials. Unconsolidated sediments are not bedrock, but like subsurface materials. And then you have to go deductive again, right? You have to see what's actually behind there. What are the specific attributes that drive this? So this is work in progress for Niara. She's in the middle through sieving through the data and iterating around these different approaches. So I'm thinking from those attitudes, right? We're also really needing curiosity because a lot of times we can learn from different disciplines, additional approaches, and luckily scientists are curious by nature, and this is not really a problem. I also want to bring this to this idea of transdisciplinary because that's what I call the talk after all, and kind of give a definition what we mean in our project when we talk about transdisciplinary. So interdisciplinary is more than two disciplines. We have the integration, the synthesis, the harmonization of approaches, knowledge, skills, and concepts, the fruit smoothie. Transdisciplinary has all of the components of interdisciplinary, but also comes with not only academics, but also impacted groups, practitioners, all working together to solve problems that typically are of high stakes. So the community is part of this, is part of the design of the research. The high stakes is something that we are very aware of across critical zone sciences. When we just look at the grand challenges and the sustainable development goals, a lot of those have to do with critical zone science, from quality education to clean water, climate action, life below water, life on land, and so forth. So the stakes are high for those items. And when we're just looking at what funding agencies are moving towards, it's also really this community-informed science by people for people. This here is just from the latest request for proposals for a new program at NSF CHIRP. It's really clear the building equitable community partnerships is in there. And then the translation of research outcomes to community solutions and so forth. It's really integrated in there that for these high stakes problems, we need community-based transdisciplinary. Okay, last one, I show this one here because this is an example of sort of a learning that we collectively are doing as part of the education program in our cluster. Long time ago, I had this idea that I would like to collaborate with partners at Jackson State University. So I'm at the University of Vermont. That's a PWI, a predominantly white institution. Jackson State University is an HBCU, so historically Black university or college. And we had an existing partnership, and I had this idea of, yeah, we should really do something around undergraduate education. And I had these ideas. I was cautioned by some others of our team to not make assumptions of what is needed and what would be helpful, but ask first. And so we did ask, and we learned from the faculty at Jackson State that the type of things that I had thought of, they're like, this is not really where our critical need is. We need STEM teacher education. So as the full group, we kind of had ideas on the type of STEM teacher education that we wanted to do. But then we talked to the teachers. They told us, well, yeah, you have good ideas, but also we need resources and we really need different teaching modalities. So then we adjusted and co-developed this together. When then the community came to us in the context of Jackson water crisis and said, we need networking, we need to build more community, we need to bring outside resources in. And so it goes. The thing is, without having people that keep on telling us what actually is the need, this here would not have happened, right? The adjustment of what an idea is versus what we actually need to do does not happen. And learning from this really is that we realized, some of us needed to realize this, me for sure. Some of us were a bit more like the old fish in the water, and you're like, yep, this is the water that you're swimming in. That if we want to do these transdisciplinary approaches well, if we want to bring communities in, we cannot put this sort of at the end as the cherry on the cake, right? When we are clear on the values that underlie the work that we do, say, in this case, for us is really important, equity, diversity, and community, that needs to be on the front end and needs to be baked into what we do, like the flower. Because when we do this, then equity will determine how we will do our work. Diversity values will determine who will do the work, and community will inform us what we're even working on to meet a critical need. And then that leads into research and education. So there's a lot of work. This is the paper that we wrote on these experiences. There's a lot of people that have looked into this, so we're definitely not the first ones, and we won't be the last, whether it's in the context of teaching, whether it's in the context of the currency in science, the co-authorship, all these kinds of aspects. This is sort of like underneath the hood of we want to do transdisciplinary science. So here's another worry that I sometimes encounter when I talk about this. And this is the worry that spending intentionally time on team functioning and values takes away time, energy, resources from the science and the education. And I think it has something to do with how we define impact, right? So this is a figure that sort of is an attempt to synthesize this, that on the one of these y-axis, we have the low and the high impact, right? I mean, we want to be very high on impact. If we do not have team diversity, multiple perspectives across a lot of different axes, and community integration, we cannot get to the high impact. And one thing that I think more and more about is to get teams into that space of doing this work. We also need to work on individual and team growth, right? And that's, I think, where often the worry comes of, like, when we're putting time into this, we're wasting time, right? We're taking time away from something else. I think it's a false trade-off, because similarly to the assumption that in interdisciplinary sciences, everybody has to know a little bit of everything. If we all would work like this, it would be very inefficient, right? It's a misconception of, again, what the fruit smoothie is. If we put together our teams really well, we kind of can manage amazing things. The same way, if we manage to put our teams together well, to put our questions and our research in service of what actually is a critical need in the context of transdisciplinarity, we can have really high impact that not only sort of benefit maybe a single group, a single process, but it actually benefits a much larger group of people. So I think there's another sort of version of a blind spot in that sense, that impact, rigor, and focus on team science and values are not compatible. I think that is not correct. Okay, so with this, the last piece of attitude. So what I think for this, the awareness around these aspects is really important as well. So to answer the question, what is water in that context? All of those things is water, right? All of these things is water. It is a useful analogy, in my view, to kind of take a look at what we're doing, the physical components, the technological, the social aspects. And with that, I am at my time. And thank you all for being here.
Julia, let me on the outset say this was an amazing talk. So thank you very much. Very insightful in there. If I may jump in with one question, Julia, I think you explained very well this whole idea of interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, and so forth. But the new catchphrase over the last decade is convergence. And do you have any thoughts on that in the context of what you talked about?
Yeah, thank you so much, Praveen. Yeah, we have a lot of words for similar things, I would say. For the convergence, I think this is really, to me, exciting to see that convergence is essentially a term that tells us a bit how we might operationalize our aspirations of interdisciplinarity, because it's a bit of the we're now making the fruit smoothie, right? Its convergence comes with synthesis, it comes with integration, it comes with harmonization. So what a lot of the programs, I think, that from Convergence Accelerator to a lot of themes that we're getting on convergence science do is exactly this. It's exactly the expectation of we want to see integration. I think convergence does not automatically integrate this aspect the way, at least how I'm using it in terms of transdisciplinarity, that it's community inspired and community based, that impacted communities are and practitioners are part of it, but it definitely gets at this interdisciplinarity in action for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
I also have a question. What would be your best lesson learned or the best advice you could give to anyone leading a team or a group of people and towards achieving a better transdisciplinary? Because it's not always easy mingling all different people's skill all together, especially when they come from different um, domains. And I've worked a lot in the corporation world and everything, but I know it's a different way to manage there than it would be to manage researchers and faculty. So would you have a lesson or advice to give on that?
Yeah, I have I need to preface this by I'm still learning myself. So a lot of the things that I said is actively learning in process. And I think maybe the most important thing is a bit of the openness to being willing to be wrong and being wrong again and being wrong again. Like as we're doing this, we are learning. And to sort of normalize that, you know, there are a couple of really amazing quotes out there. There's one by Loretta Ross on sort of calling people in versus calling people out, you know, that if somebody tells you something that you might not be aware of, they're actually investing in you, right? They're like not trying to fight with you. Maybe they are, but there's always something to be learned. So if we can normalize this from the get-go, that all contributions have values, that you are gonna be wrong, it's gonna feel uncomfortable, and all you gotta do is learn from it and move on, and then you'll be wrong again. I think this is something maybe as sort of a foundation piece that is really important. If this is possible in a group, then everything else is possible as well. But if we're generating a group culture that is sort of fear-based, where people are afraid of being wrong, where it's really not possible to tell anybody anything without them crumbling, there's very little growth. There's very little individual or team growth happening. So I think there's a couple of things that as leads that we can do to normalize this, to set an expectation also. We can do a lot of things by modeling this, by modeling being wrong and learning and getting back up again. I also think that with specifically the tasks that we have, the big challenges that we're dealing with, and I'm, mostly funded through NSF, so I'm paying a lot of attention to what NSF is also doing and their umbrella concept for building a resilient planet, right? There is a lot of these new programs have this so integral that we need to know what we're doing and who we are doing it for. That really asks us to be aware. So I think that as folks that right now have some power, have power in forms of leadership positions, we can set the tone a bit. We can make room for a lot of the next generation to also learn from this. We can learn from, I learn more often from my students probably than they learn from me. So it goes both ways. Sorry, this is sort of a bit rambly, but the question is well taken. I think there is a lot of things that we can do to just normalize that we all have contributions to make and that we are not supposed to be right all the time.
Yes, I understand. Thank you. Yes, Marian, go ahead.
Thank you, Julia, for a very enlightening presentation of the concept of interdisciplinarity. I do not have very specific questions because you are way beyond where I am with this analysis. But I have two not quite related questions, but I take this opportunity because I know that you are involved across clusters, CZ clusters, and I have one question about education and one about your project. So the question about education outreach would be, how do you see that the CZ science term trickles outside those who are involved in this area, in this research area, the researchers, actually, scientists? So that's the first question, because we have some educational activity, many educational activities, and we look at this aspect, do we have an impact or not? So that's from where the question comes. The next question is about your project. And it's related to team, inter-team, across-team collaboration. How does you see today the sharing of big data in CZ science through the dedicated tools which are available to the CZ network cluster, HydroShare specifically?
All right. You might need to remind me of the second question once I'm first through with the
HydroShare.
answer
How
on the
is
first one.
HydroShare used? How is HydroShare used?
Let me start with the answer on the education part and specifically the terminology that we use in terms of critical zone sciences, right? It is not the most intuitive term. When I ask folks that have not engaged with it, they don't know what it means, and it could mean a lot of things. Like there are many places that could be called critical in a zone in our lives. So I think that it is a good term for us in the research arena to know instantaneously that we're talking about an integrated system. I don't necessarily think that we have to force this onto middle schools, elementary schools, high schools, because what it is really looking at a system, at an integrated system. So when we could decide, should we spend time on saying, okay, no, you have to use that terminology, or should we spend time on saying, don't worry about the jargon, worry about its meaning. We're generating and we're producing concepts, data, ideas, applications that will help you teach your kid that you need to understand the Earth system, the Earth surface processes as an integrated system. Typically, when I'm engaged in teacher education, I mentioned critical zone science, there's a bit of blank stares, but then when we say, oh yeah, it's kind of environmental and earth sciences, they're like, oh yeah, okay, then we get it. It's a sort of like, I don't know how popular my view is on this. I think we should worry less about the terminology in that context for especially K-12 education. I think what's important is the learning, the concept, the meaning of this. And this actually, I keep on getting the feedback that the framing of the critical zone is very helpful, because teachers get to integrate this into their next generation science standards, where there's a lot of systems pieces in there. There's a lot of environmental science, earth science, where they can say, okay, we're using this concept as a whole and we're plugging in examples. And then they need to know this term critical zone science only to know where the resources are, right? Where can they find more ideas and resources that they can use in their classroom? So that would be sort of my thing. I think the critical zone will not go away. It's been here forever. And us using the terminology this way is for us, I think, a good way of knowing what we talk about. But if it is a burden or an obstacle to K-12 education to adopt the learning from us, then we should not use the term. Then we would just say, okay, this is an integrated earth system, integrated environmental system. But here, remember the term so that you can find the resources. For the HydroShare, I think it's really exciting that we have right now so much effort in getting data in one place. It's like one of those for I think for a lot of people, getting the data up, it's so procrastinatory, right? Like we're getting really excited about doing the research, and then we're out in the field, or we're doing the analysis, we're running the models, and we're worrying about graduations and about next proposals and about papers. Getting the data actually uploaded is so important, and it's good. I think to me, it's really good that there is a central place where we can do this right now. And yet we're like collectively slow. We're slow on my project as well, because also in order to do it well, you want to do it well. It takes time. I do think that there are data that are more sort of single-use studies, right? There might be studies that, yeah, we're putting the data up there, but it might not be that this will feed a meta-analysis anytime soon. But then there's data that we're putting up there, a lot of the time series data, a lot of the things like also the CamelsCam, the data set that I talked about, is up on HydroShare and available. These are sort of multi-use data sets. They're going to be sliced and diced in many different ways and answering questions in many different ways. So I think it's great that everything is up there. I don't think that everything is going to be used to the same extent, but there's definitely a lot of data that will find multiple uses and kind of get us the biggest bang for the buck in that sense. Did I answer all of your question, Marian?
Yeah, the first one, definitely. The second one seems that, yes, the resource is there, but how useful is it and how will be used and when? That's a 10-year-old question.
Oh, yeah, you were also specifically were asking about tools.
No, not about tools. Data is what people look for typically. They have tools in general, I would say, especially says its own tools. But how often is this cross-cluster analysis happening? You have in your project targeting sources across US with scientific question at the top. How useful is the data, and if you really make use of HydroShare, repository? That was
Yeah.
the question.
Yeah. I would say it's very useful. For example, especially if you're coming from an inductive approach, there's a lot of data that you need these sort of machine learning tools that kind of look for patterns that can cluster for us. They're often very data hungry, and good data in makes probably good answers out. So if we're starting from an inductive sort of approach to see where is something where we want to look more, this is already a really important starting point. But imagine we're finding some pattern. Imagine we're realizing there's something going on with the Midwest at a specific season and a specific thing that happens with our geogenic solutes. Then we can look more into the process that brings us more to generating a hypothesis, testing hypothesis. We can go to HydroShare and we can look at the network and see who actually has data. Is there something that fits that pattern, but that has, on top of just, say, the stream water, has also soil moisture, has also eddy covariance data, has soil chemical analysis. Can we use these data to test a hypothesis? And this is sort of that iteration that I think is really interesting. Sometimes those patterns, depending on what tools we use, what scale we're looking at, they're not instantaneously making sense, right? There's a lot of fine tuning, a lot of like kind of filtering and refiltering the data. But we're always coming to a point where we need to understand the process that actually generates the pattern that we're seeing. And for this, we need data that is there. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry to take so much time.
I just want to say that I totally agree with your opinion about how the word critical interface or critical zone, it often kind of makes, it's not fully adapted into society. They don't know the terminology yet, and I think it behooves us to maybe change it up a little, say in our like Earth's critical zone or environmental critical zone, so you don't have to have this jarring like, what are you talking about? And then over maybe a decade after saying Earth's critical zone, or sciences, or environmental critical, it's saying those three words, then eventually you drop the first one because everyone knows what it is already. Kind of like when, I don't know, the Facebook, was the Facebook. And then they're like, everyone knows what it's the. Why are we saying the? So I think it behooves us to make it more simple and easier to understand in the context of like immediately understandable, and you don't have to explain it in 2 sentences after you've said critical zone, just for like 5-10 years. I mean, that's outside of the scientific community that already understands what that is, that's already drank the Kool-Aid for today. But like just because other scientific groups or other research can take the word critical zone and apply it to like chemistry interactions that are not organic, or the moon or whatever. So like, just so if we want to brand it to be critical zone of the Earth, I think whenever we say it to groups outside or elementary school kids, like, this is environmental critical zone science. That's my opinion.
I love how you're thinking about, like, we could in hindsight generate an on-ramp to this term,
Yeah,
right? That at some point
just
we
get
could
the on-ramp, so you don't have to like stop and then explain it and then go back to what you really wanted to talk about. That's my experience, actually.
Yeah.
Thank you. I really enjoyed your talk and the beginning of it, and I just love it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think Neil has a question as well.
Thanks, Julia. I was intrigued at the end, you're talking about the importance of sort of team development and enhancement. Do you have any good examples of things that have been tried that you felt were very effective in fostering cohesiveness and communication.
Yeah, I was lucky enough, like it's an interest of mine, but I was also lucky enough that we had a postdoc on a project for a while, Dustin Kincaid. He's now working with the USGS, who's very interested and versed in team science, who brought a lot of the ideas and said, hey, how about we're having a team meeting that's a bit different. And a lot of sort of these ideas came from actually a lot of folks on the team that have this this interest. One thing that was really helpful for me early on was when we did an exercise kind of on the values of our team, and we used the Jamboard when it was still a thing. Now we don't have Jamboard anymore, but Jamboard to anonymously ask everybody to contribute. How do we actually put these values in practice? Like, for example, being inclusive as a team or respecting each other's time. How does it look like in practice? And this was really important for me as somebody who's kind of setting a lot of the tone and the culture as the lead, because there were things like, well, if you're ignoring time zones when you're scheduling meetings, that is not inclusive. This is not respecting our time. Or if people keep on planning big papers without putting out a big call to an entire team, informing everybody, this is what we're doing, opt in, but here are the criteria. This is our co-authorship agreement. You're accountable to this. So those are a lot of things that helped me to put something that sometimes is just really overused, right? Like values, to really put it in practice, like to go from to actually operationalizing it. I think I'm looking for the word right now, but there is like the there's some quote from somebody that I'm blanking on right now, but I think it's from professing to practice or something like that. That was one that just came to my mind that helped me personally.
Great, thanks.
So I just want to add something that we were doing at the water survey for a while, and I don't know if we kind of had it going before COVID, kind of continued in COVID, but at our meetings, a lot of us work independently, but then we get together and have a meeting, and then we just kind of like, okay, and then we all go back to our work. And then we're all working on similar things, or we're working on same projects, but we don't really like get to know or continue to get to know each other. So one of the things we did is we would talk about our, like what we did that week, what our strengths are in sharing stuff about how we work, and what we like to do, what we like about our job, or various challenges that we have, like just in a group setting. And that just kind of, it's almost like you're resharing your resume with your same group again and again and again. Because if you're not working directly with that person day in, day out, you don't know what those strengths are. And I thought it really brought people closer together and understanding the diversity and the strengths that we had in our group, which were much greater than I think anyone thought.
Yeah, this is such a good point. That's actually the first thing I should have said to Neil's question, is that investing in the relationship building early on is so fundamental.
And even
that's
technical skills that we were sharing. We're like, oh, I didn't know you know how to do that. Oh, great.
Yeah.
I'll call you about this thing. It was
Yeah,
or like,
yeah.
hey, we have this big gap. We need to fill it.
And I think it gets to, I see we're at time, just like one little mention. It gets to the thing that, yes, we're scientists, we're educators, but we're first and foremost people with everything that comes with people, right? Like the need for connection, it doesn't go away just because we're scientists or educators. It might actually be more important.
Thank you so much. Is there any more questions?
That's kind of a quick question. your last example on team development and kind of like the iterative nature of, you think you have an idea and you assemble a team and then you ask other relevant people and they're like, oh, actually, this is what we need. Have you ever iterated yourself out of relevance in team development? Because I just feel like that's just something that I would think about, is like you get to a point where you're like, well, this is great, everyone, but it has nothing to do with your expertise anymore.
In a way that can happen when probably the question on the front end does not meet a critical need. And then if that's not what's needed, if my expertise is not what's needed there, then I better know this. Yeah, I better know this. So this could totally happen. I do think that maybe it touches to the ego strength. If that happens, that should be fine. Like, I'd be able to tolerate this. But I think it also gets to this idea of generosity when we come to the point that we realize there is something that's really necessary. We identified it through a really good and careful process. We want to put resources and energy there. And in the sense of going back to these interactional skills, my favorite things it really is to keep on learning. Like, I'm not a specialist in team science. I have never studied this. It's not my degree, but it's my favorite thing to learn enough about it so that I can actually apply it in some ways and talk to the people that know this in much greater depth. The same way how I enjoy talking with computer scientists and data scientists, and like a lot of the folks that have these contributory expertise that I don't have, but I want to know enough to be able to help make a project gel. So in that way, I actually was never worried about becoming I forgot how you worded it, Allison, like to sort of design myself out of something just because it goes somewhere where I don't have the expertise anymore. I never was worried about it, but it could happen. If it meets a critical need, fair enough. Like,
yeah, it's like you learned that about yourself, I guess, and you just have to be satisfied with the contribution that you've made without being a part of it in the end, I guess, is what I'm thinking about.
Yeah, but I think I need to acknowledge that this is also easy said for me now with the type of privilege that I have as a tenured professor, right? Like, this is something that I can say, and it's like, well, in that case, I might not be relevant for that specific study and other people should do it. I probably would have answered your question very differently like 15 years ago when I was worried about where my career was going, where promotions are still given for very specialized things where we don't have that that latitude of just being, yep, let's just see where we can contribute and how we can learn. Yeah.
So a quick question, Julia. I know we are over time, but one of the biggest barriers to the team publication, so as to say, is our tenure system. If you and promotion, so it's not the first 6 years, but throughout the career, where people evaluate that if you have a 2-author paper, your contribution is larger than if you have a 10-author paper. And my biggest counterexample is that the human genome sequence paper had over 200 authors, and probably for each author individually, that's probably one of the biggest contributions in their career because it made so much of a difference. So some problems are extremely challenging and they need this teamwork and interdisciplinarity and multiple expertise to come together to solve the problem. But in academia, I mean, because people can't read and they can count, they basically say, okay, you have 1/10 of a contribution irrespective of the complexity. How do you overcome that barrier? I mean, you are at a career stage where you would have had to overcome those. So I think it'll be useful for our colleagues here and our younger students to hear your view on that.
Yeah. I think I did not have big issues around this, but I had to explain. I had to explain what my contribution is in the same way how in some fields, for example, last author is actually a really important place in a publication. When folks ask me like, why do you not work on stuff? Why are you the last author on so many things? So I think I'm in the College of Arts and Sciences where there is a lot of different ways of doing. And so we are asked to explain what that means in our discipline, and what the contribution means and how important, because also very difficult to get it right, are these larger interdisciplinary endeavors. So the way how I made it work for myself is to talk early and often to administrators at my institutions to just learn how do they see these types of interdisciplinary work. I'm glad that in my institution, this is something that's highly valued. I'm in a department that is interdisciplinary itself, geoscience, geography, there's human geography, physical geography, geosciences, environmental sciences. So it's in and of itself places a high value on the interdisciplinarity. So for me, it wasn't an uphill battle, but I can imagine that in some settings, it can be very difficult. And I think there is a little bit what we can do, say, if this is, if you're a student, a postdoc, early career scientist, getting that information from that institution is already really helpful. Explaining things in the CV and in the write-up really carefully, what does it mean in your discipline? But I also think now as somebody who is mid-career right now, the stakes for me, they're not that high anymore. So I also have the opportunity to make some room for folks that actually need the visibility right now that can be first author. For example, I love having my grad student first author and then I'm second or last. Because that's also something that signals ownership over the work and a lot of the agency, but also the visibility and the credit for it. So I think it goes both ends, that the folks that have some decision powers might make some room. And then I'm not at that stage yet, but for folks that actually get to even decide and have influence on the RPT criteria, right? Like the reappointment, promotion, tenure criteria, to also make changes in the sense of how we evaluate even expertise, how we evaluate contribution. I think there is something that we have still some work to do.
Thank you, Julia.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. I think we're a bit over time, so we're going to end this now. And thanks everyone for attending. That was really interesting. I learned a lot. My former boss used to say, just try to like be the one talking the less, you'll be the one learning the most. Hearing people is easier. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.